myself. My name is Kathy Basney. I have worked in mental health and addictions field as well as personal development and wellness for over 20 years. I am a registered psychotherapist. I work primarily out of the Waterloo region, but actually have worked with folks all across North America. So just really want to highlight, though, before we jump into the topic for today, that this session, it is titled Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it really is an educational session. So I just want to highlight the name of the techniques we use is CBT. So even though it has the therapy name in it, given the platform and the style that that this venue uses, it really isn't therapy, it's an education. But what I love about CBT, and just so you know, I've been using these strategies for well over 20 years. What I love about these strategies is it actually really helps us as individuals start to notice unsupportive thought patterns. So probably a lot of you have heard this idea of how we have these automated kind of messages, these thoughts that just kind of roam in our head, and often tell us messages that don't really make us feel very good about ourselves. There's lots of really great ways to turn those messages into being supportive messages so that they nurture us, so that they support us, so that they help us. But what tends to happen is that our brain, even from a very, very young age, starts to collect data, starts to collect information that often is not helpful and isn't supportive. And so for a lot of us, some of those thoughts are even on the unconscious realm where we don't even necessarily notice that we're saying these things or that we're hearing these things in our mind in a way that actually hurts us and is not helpful. So my thoughts are over the next 6 weeks is really just to introduce some strategies that, and really important to understand this part, a lot of the strategies I'm going to introduce are really easy to understand how to use them. It's important to know, though, that not always easily to use. And why is that? And the reality is the research shows us that the brain is actually, our neuroscience, the way in which our brain has survived from generation to generation to generation is that it has a natural default to a survival mode. So our brain is wired for survival. It is not wired for happiness. So even when we're in the process of wanting to recognize unsupportive thought patterns that really actually aren't helpful for us. So thought patterns that kind of make us feel sad about ourselves, make us feel depressed about ourselves, anxious, thoughts that maybe stir up anger or really just kind of put us in this self-doubt place, really impact negatively our self-esteem. Believe it or not, a lot of those thoughts at some point in our life, our brain originally thought that this was something that was going to help for our survival. So even when we start to go through the next 6 weeks, and I hope most of you will join us for the full 6 weeks, even as we go through things over the next 6 weeks, I want you just to notice any resistance that comes up within. So whether it's unsettled feelings or even the feeling of, I just don't want to do this exercise anymore, or thoughts around, this is a waste of time, I don't see a difference, or how is this helpful? Or even just actually forgetting. Just know that to some degree, as odd as this sounds, that's actually our brain on an unconscious level saying to us, no, so not interested in changing the way I think, because up till now, the way I think has actually helped me survive. And so sometimes we need to push through some of that resistance and just very gently push through. But over the next 6 weeks, what I want to do is introduce some strategies that if you can find ways to just gently begin to try them out on a daily basis, even if it's just once or twice a day, even just for a couple of minutes. When we introduce these strategies into our lives, what it can do is start to help us move through a change theory. So, bringing stuff from the unconscious, thoughts that aren't helping us, bringing those to the surface so that we can gently challenge them. By gently challenging them, we create alternative thoughts. So, each time I hear myself say this, I want to replace it with this thought. And as we navigate through time, the idea is that we start to notice the unsupportive thoughts a little more often. So that becomes an uncomfortable time, a very uncomfortable time for a lot of us in the change theory. And then we move to starting to notice that, feels like I don't notice those unsupportive thoughts as often. So for the next little bit, we're gonna look at strategies that, one, help us uncover what those unsupportive thoughts are. Two, what might alternative statements be that we can put in place of those unsupportive thoughts? And three, what are the habits that we can create in a daily basis to help us notice so that we can make these changes in a way that's supportive? One of the things that is important to mention here is that when we talk about that resistance feeling, when we talk about, I don't feel like doing it, or this feels boring, or this makes me feel uncomfortable, so I don't want to keep trying something that makes me feel uncomfortable. We want to try and push through those thoughts. So even when we hear those thoughts, we want to say to ourselves, okay, so still going to keep doing this because I believe that I can make some positive change. Because what the research shows us is that when we start to challenge the unsupportive thoughts and replace the unsupportive thoughts with more supportive thoughts, what we do notice is we can rewire our brain towards happiness. So it's that whole idea that happiness is within. So what that means is that our life circumstances may not change, but how we perceive and how we think about those life circumstances begin to change. As those begin to change, we're changing our brain. We still want the survival piece. So none of this is about questioning actual survival. But what we want to do is question, is this about survival? Or is this no longer helping me, no longer serving me? And now I'm going to change it. I'm going to rewire my brain so that I'm looking at ways in which I can start to notice and feel and experience more happiness in my life. So what we know from the research is cognitive behavioral therapy, when implemented in its full scope over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, we can start to notice some very positive changes. The strategies we're going to work on, we're going to test it out here for 6 weeks and see what people think. And if feedback is this is something that we want to see ongoing, we can look at extending it past 6 weeks. But even if it ends at the 6 weeks in terms of our time together, even if you only took strategies from one session and used those in a consistent way, what we understand from the research is in about 8 to 12 weeks, when we start to look back, we can start to notice, hey, I do notice some changes. When we start to look at those changes over the courses of 3 to 6 months, it starts to have a much more profound and positive impact. When we start changing these negative thought patterns into more supportive thought patterns, at about a year is when we really notice a fundamental change in life. But even in as few as 6 to 8 weeks, it can start to have very, very positive impacts. As I said, I've been using a lot of these strategies for probably over 20 years. And when I look back at how I navigate things, it's very different. So I just want to provide an example of what this might look like and what we're aiming for in terms of recognizing those unsupportive thought patterns. A few weeks ago, I was stopped at a light, and the car behind me rear-ended me. I noticed immediately. And my initial thoughts were, oh my gosh, where am I going to get the money to pay for the car, repairs on the damage that's done? What was that person thinking? It's totally their fault. I'm stopped at a light and they hit me. They weren't paying attention. What were they thinking? Oh my gosh, is my daughter who's in the car with me, is she safe? Is she okay? So those thoughts pop up. Those are survival thoughts. Those are important thoughts. Those are things we don't want to squash. Here's the difference though. In the past, those thoughts would have dictated how I then behaved. So I would have got out of the car and probably yelled at the driver, what were you thinking? Did you not notice the light? This is your responsibility, your fault. You're going to have to take care of this. That's not how I navigated the situation. How I navigated the situation is I have made an intention around challenging my survival thought patterns to question, is this about survival in this moment? This is more in hindsight, but what I noticed afterwards when I reflected on the circumstance was before I even got out of the car, so in less than a minute, already my thoughts were switching from, I don't have the money to pay for the car. What if my daughter's hurt? She has health issues. How much more of this can we handle in terms of issues for her? All of what was he thinking? Those thoughts switched to, I choose to believe that most people are good. I choose to act out of love rather than fear. So I get out of the car. I checked with my daughter right away to make sure initially she's okay. Got out of the car, take a couple deep breaths in to try and ground myself because I'm shaking, and I'm very well aware that my amygdala has been activated. That fight, flight, or freeze survival center of my brain's been activated. Take some deep breaths just to calm myself down. I approach the car as the gentleman's getting out of his car. His immediate response is, my response to him is, are you okay? I want to make sure you're okay. And he was like, you could tell when he first got out, it was like he was coming, like running out of the car towards me. And very quickly he responded from that place. And he turned to me and said, are you okay? So then we take care of things, we take care of business, but we navigate from a place of love, not fear. So we have the conversation, exchange information, all of those pieces. So for me, how might that have been different? So I think, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have got out and I would have yelled and screamed. And likely he would have responded by yelling and screaming very defensively, because naturally we're defensive when we feel attacked. So for me, recognizing the thought patterns, hearing the thoughts so that I could process them to understand, are these survival thoughts right now? No, my survival is not threatened. I am safe in this moment. So I have the ability to challenge it and then go from a place of how do I choose to act? That situation, I think, is very different today than it would have been 5 years ago. So the good news is nobody's hurt, no real damage to the car. But that's an example of the benefits of how CBT can work. Examples would be how we just navigate with our family members, messages that we hear within ourselves. So when we look in the mirror and we hear the unconscious thoughts or even very conscious thoughts about, I don't like the way I look. I don't like how much I weigh. I don't like the color of my hair. I don't like that I have gray coming in. I don't like whatever those messages are. How do we challenge them in a way that we can maybe use some of them to motivate us for improving our self-esteem, but more so challenge them in a way to say, I love and accept myself for who I am in this moment. And as I accept myself, as I challenge those unsupportive thoughts to allow that acceptance, I allow a more lighter sense of life to come in. My happiness increases tenfold. So that's kind of where we're going to go over the next 6 weeks. So for today, I want to actually give you your first strategy. So the very first strategy is, and I want to just say, if anyone has questions, please feel free to type the question into the chat bar. If you want it just to come to me so nobody sees your question, make sure you change that setting so it shows that it's just coming to me. If you're comfortable with others seeing it, feel free to have that out for others to see, and I'll do the best I can to answer questions as we go along. So today's strategy that I want to teach you, it's called the wise mind. So the wise mind is a wonderful strategy used in both CBT and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, but just a real great practical tool to help us start to notice, do our decisions and choices, and I'm talking even our basic choices in life in terms of, am I going to eat a chocolate bar instead of an apple? Am I going to drive 20 kilometers over the speed limit? What shirt do I want to wear today? All the way to the bigger decisions around, should I buy this house or not buy? Like, should I sell my house and buy a new house or not? Should I travel? Should I date this person or not? Should I stay in this marriage or not? So all the way from our everyday smaller decisions and choices all the way up to our bigger ones, we have a guiding kind of, for lack of a better word, a set point in which we tend to navigate those decisions. And it typically either is cognitively focused, intellectually, rationalization determines our choices, or emotional based, where we tend to be reactive based on our emotions. Our emotions tell us what decision. So I choose this top today because I think about, from a practical sense, why this shirt makes sense for me today. Or I choose this top today just because I pick it up and it feels good. And I maybe didn't choose other ones because they didn't feel good today. So it's either thought-based, rational focused, or emotional focused. We want to start to notice which one drives us more often. Doesn't matter which one drives us more often at this point. We want to start to notice which of the two. Why? Because we want to then start to enhance the skill on the other side. I'm going to show you this diagram here. So the top part here, this is wise mind. So when we make decisions, we have our cognitive or our emotional base. If our decisions are only ever chosen from one or the other, it's either cognitively, rationally focused decisions or emotionally based focused, we are making decisions with only half of the important information that we need in order to make good decisions for ourselves in terms of our life. And that is when we bring the two together, we have this part here, which is called the wise mind. So I'm holding this up because I want, if you can, to take a good look at it. And really all it is two circles that overlap in the center. I want you to write this down for yourself for using throughout the week. Label one side of it cognitive, the other side emotion, and label the inside of the center wise mind. What I want you to do is just to start to notice the different decisions that I've made throughout the day. Were they thought-based? Did I think through the decision? Or were they emotional based? Because we want to notice which of the two we're stronger in. Then if you can, what I want you to do is each day, at least one time a day, if you can, think of a decision or a choice you need to make. Doesn't have to be a big one, it can be a small one, or you can play with some bigger ones, like the decision of, the reality is we live in a pandemic world right now. So the reality of maybe I need some, maybe I need or want some new clothes. Do I want to take a chance of going to a mall given we're in a pandemic? So maybe that's a slightly bigger choice. So you can play with what level of choices you're making. So it can be about what you want to choose to wear today, or it can be what you're going to eat for the day. Should you eat junk food or healthy food, or is it a treat versus a pattern? So it just doesn't matter. Just pick one or two choices that you're going to make throughout the day. And what I want you to do is write down The choice is if you're going to be making it using your wise mind. So just notice which one's easier. Was it easier to talk about what emotions are involved in making that choice? Well, choosing to wear that shirt versus this shirt, I know that shirt made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel uneasy. It made me feel unsettled. Choosing this one made me feel excited. I liked the color. I just noticed it brightened my mood up. Or am I going to go to the mall tonight? The emotions that come up, I notice that fear comes up. I notice this unsettled feeling. I notice I feel anxious, or I feel excited. I feel, just thrilled at the idea of getting to the mall. So just name the emotions, and I want you to name the thoughts. So what are the reasons? For practical reasons, the rational thoughts. So pull them out onto each side and just list as many as you can, and just sit with that experience for a minute. And then from the place of wise mind, which is looking at the choice in front of you, having both the thought-based, why this is a practical decision versus why this is an emotional decision, bring the two together. So I want you to also think about a time in your life where, if you're a thought-based person, the cognitive person, rationalization in terms of all your decisions, think about, was there a time when you were trying to make a good decision for your life, and on paper, that was the best decision for you? And when you think about it rationally, that makes sense. But emotionally, it just didn't fit, and therefore it just never worked out for you. Or vice versa, where you made a decision because it just felt great, and then afterwards, as it played out, you were like, oh, what was I thinking? That was such a bad decision. So an example of that might be something like, I make the decision that I'm going to get in 5 workouts this week. On paper, everything about that sounds good. I write down all the reasons on paper, why, rationally, why that makes sense, why I can do it, how I can fit it in my schedule. But emotionally, if it doesn't feel like a fit for me, maybe going from not working out at all to 5 times is just too big of a leap. And emotionally, that feels very taxing. It feels heavy. It kind of reminds me of all the other times that I've set goals and I didn't meet those goals. So emotionally, it doesn't work for me. Even if my rational thought was, this is why I wanted to do it, if emotionally that's not in alignment, then the reality is, doesn't matter how good on paper it sounds, it's not going to happen. So we want to use the exercise of the wise mind, start to play with it with smaller decisions. Where it becomes incredibly valuable is when we need to make some of those bigger decisions. Should I go back to school or not? Should I quit my job and move on to a different job? Should I choose to stay in this relationship or not? Should I enter into this relationship or not? When we start to make some of the bigger decisions in our life, ensuring that we have practiced that state of wise mind means it is much more likely that we are making a decision that is truly well informed for us. So what we want to notice is some of those unconscious emotions and some of those unconscious thoughts. So the more we play with the exercise of wise mind, things that would never have occurred to us, either emotionally or thought-based, start to come to the surface. This is what CBT skills are all about. It's bringing those unconscious driving forces to the surface so that we can assess them. Does this serve us well in terms of survival, but also in terms of happiness? If it doesn't serve us well, then we put alternatives in place. That's what this strategy is in terms of wise mind. It's going to bring those things to the surface so we can assess them in a meaningful way, and then start to make some good, healthy choices for ourselves. Where this makes the most difference in our life is when we actually start to implement these skills into our life in a way where they no longer feel like we're actually using a skill or a strategy. It just becomes a part of who we are. So when somebody hits me from behind in the car, I'm engaging that wise mind. I'm thinking rationally around survival and all of those other things. I'm also thinking about the decision in terms of who I choose to be in this world, in terms of how I choose to behave in response to my emotions, but I also honor all of my emotions. So another piece that was really important is after that car fender bender, once I got bumped, I knew I needed to make sure, using the wise mind, that I needed to take some extra time for my own self-care in order to nourish my own emotions, in recognition that I felt shock, that I felt shaken, that I felt scared, that I felt threatened. And all of those pieces are important for me to notice, because then I can do something about it, which was, in the moment, I chose to act from a place of love. And afterwards, I also chose to act from a place of love in terms of self-care, allowing myself to say, you know what, that was scary. That did not feel good. These are all the emotions that came to the surface. And now this is what I need to do to take care of myself. So that's wise mind. So I'm hoping that you can play with that over the week. And then what we'll do is, at the beginning of each session, just kind of open it up in terms of there was any questions from anyone from the week before. Do the best I can to answer the questions if there were any. And if not, what we'll do is we'll continue to build on the skills. So I'm going to add some other pieces to wise mind and some other strategies next week. So I know it's a little bit rushed, a little bit fast. I hope that this felt valuable, that it felt like a good use of your time. And I really, truly hope that I'll get to see folks next week. So we have maybe 2 more minutes if anyone had any other questions. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold up the chart again so that folks can also see that. And I am unsure how to mute people, and I apologize because Leanne did show me that before and I'm not remembering. So if you have a question, if you can throw that into the chat bar. Great.
If you have any questions, if anyone has any questions, I can definitely help you unmute, or you can type them in the chat bar. That's not a problem.
Yeah. And we are going to meet. I know next Wednesday is a holiday. The plan is, for those that want to still attend, please meet. The other thing that's important, we'll be building on skills from week to week, but each week can also stand on